Okay, welcome to part one of the rendering tutorial. This video is going to cover how to basically get your file kind of set up and importantly set up your view for rendering. So this will apply to whatever rendering you choose to use later on. So here I have this model. This is um, from past projects, and it has a little bit more detail than I would say your models will need for this. But you can see it's still pretty simple. It's just kind of floors and walls and windows, along with a couple railings, which you can do in a really simple way if you want to. But I think the important thing will be to just model as much as you need to illustrate the renderings with a sufficient amount of detail. So what we're going to do first is choose our views, and then we'll talk about maybe we can add some view to convey the project a little bit better. So first thing I want to do is open up my named views panel. And that's going to be how, I save my views. So in here, just like with before, we can save an angle, a view, perspective, whatever, of our viewport, and that way we can get back to that exact angle and exact position of the camera. Again, because we're compositing a couple different layers of drawing, rendering and a drawing and stuff like that, we want to be able to save this so we can get back. And it's also going to help when we start rendering. So I just go to the assignment quickly. You can see we need to set up 3 views. One of them is going to be our living space, how it relates to an outdoor living space. One of them is going to be a shared space, and one of them is going to be like some kind of site relationship. Okay, so one thing I do want to mention, first of all, if we go to our viewport here, set view, change into perspective, that's going to be our first step. So again, perspective means that the lines are converging at the horizon. That's the type of drawing where we're going to get closer to that experiential quality of how we actually see the world and experience the world, walk around in it. The other thing I want to do before I set up any views is I'm going to go to properties without anything selected in my viewport, and I'm going to choose a lens length. So this is how I'm going to change right here under the viewport where it says camera. I'm going to change kind of how wide angle my view is. So I'm going to set it to a 35. It's kind of like a 35 millimeter camera, which is something pretty common choice for architectural photography. You can see that my view got a little bit, I got a little bit, the angles of my lines kind of spread apart a little bit more. So basically, the higher that number is, the kind of more parallel the lines will be, and then the lower the number is, the wider angle or further apart my lines will be. So 35 is pretty good because we can capture a little bit more in one frame. So I'm going to set that to 35 first of all. Then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to choose a view. And I'm going to start just by, let's say I'm going to go into this unit, choose a view where I'm looking from this living space out to a courtyard space beyond. And one thing you might want to pay attention to, first of all, you're going to want to pay attention to how high your camera is. In other words, there. But yeah, before I get into that, so some of you may wonder how I'm making these kind of very slight adjustments in my viewport, which is a little bit better than, say, the scrolling or just kind of clicking and moving. So if you hold Control on your keyboard and right-click and drag, get really precise with your zoom in and zoom out. You hold Shift and right-click, you can pan, and then there's one. Hold Control and Alt and right-click. Slightly different kind of pan, really. So I can kind of like stand in one spot and look around. It's really helpful for setting up perspectives in writing. So anyway, so that's a couple of quick kind of navigation things. But like I said, one of the things that's really important here is going to be how high is my camera, just to start with. If we're imagining that we're looking at eye level, then we probably want to be between 5 and 6 feet above the ground. Unless we're sitting, maybe we could be sitting. But anyway, so first I'm going to make sure, I'm going to put myself in rendered. So and I'll talk about the glass in just a minute here, how to get that glass transparent. So I'm just going to tune where I want my camera to be in terms of height. The other thing you may want to be concerned with, especially if you're doing like a straight on shot, kind of like this, might be how do I get like these lines, the lines on the sides to be vertical, the lines up top to be horizontal. There's a couple tricks for that. One thing that I really like to do is to put myself in 2-point perspective in Rhino. And again, I did that same way. I just go right click to my viewport, set view, 2-point perspective. And that means that no matter whether I'm looking up or down, my verticals are always going to be straight up and down line. Nice. Does mess with your lens length though. That doesn't operate the same. But we can kind of estimate based on what we know from looking at it in perspective. But the other question might be, how do I get my horizontal lines to be really straight? So we can also basically turn on our camera as an object in Rhino. So if I type in camera and I'm just going to click show, you'll see it won't change what's going on in this viewport, but if I double click on my viewport here and make it so I can see all my viewports, and how it's framed, then over, you can see in my other viewports that I have now this like camera object that's been turned on. And so I can actually adjust that view by just moving the points of my camera. So I can adjust, for example, how high above floor my perspective is. That's helpful for getting that eye level that I was talking about. I can adjust where I'm looking up or down, depending how much floor or ceiling I want to get, how much horizon I want to get, etc. And if I really want to make sure, like I said, those horizontal lines are perfectly straight, I can use the rotate command. Actually, so yeah, maybe it was totally clear here. I'm gonna hide everything really quick. So that's our camera, right? So I'm looking from this point towards this. That's showing me like roughly what I have framed out. And then if I wanted to adjust so I'm perfectly horizontal, I'm gonna move this point where I'm looking relative to this point where I'm looking from. Rotate command, and I'm gonna snap it to ortho. And we could move it vertically. We use the move command, constrain it to vertical, and line it up with our there we go. Line it up with our point where we're looking from. We wanted to make sure that we're really looking straight on. But like I said, in 2-point perspective, because we're going to keep those vertical lines, it's less important. Okay, let's go back and turn on our view there. So in 2-point perspective, I can actually drag this guy down. But that, I think, that is actually a really important thing that gives us, on top of a couple of other methods, it gives us a sense of the scale of the space, because when we're looking at eye level, we have a better sense of how high the ceiling is and how large these windows are and all that kind of stuff. So that is an important component of getting the perspective image to kind of read properly. And I can also, so I'm a little bit shifted more to my right, my space, which I actually kind of like because I'm capturing some of that window. But I can also center myself. And I could even measure that out if I wanted to. Actually, inside the wall. Okay, cool. So, like I mentioned before, once you have a view set up, then what you're going to want to do is go ahead and save it. So, the named views panel open, which again, you can get to that just by typing in named view, command line. I'm going to make sure I have that viewport selected, like active. And then I'm going to click the little disk icon there where it says Save As. I call this my living space. Okay. And there we go. You should see a little thumbnail. I think you right click if you want to change the view mode from list to thumbnail. Okay. So there's one view set up. And now if I want to adjust that view, again, I can move around. You can see my camera still moving around. That's totally fine. If I ever want to go back to my view, I just double click on that, where I saved it. Okay. So another view here. Let's say I wanted to collective space. Maybe I'm looking at this courtyard. And again, we can tweak the full screen. And tweak the so this could also be something where we're showing site relationships, right? Because we have these outdoor courtyard wall where we're framing views of the neighborhood. We're seeing some of these axes where there's open spaces to to the public space around the housing, etc. So, oh yeah, another useful tip: if I click Home on the command line, sorry, not on the command line, on the keyboard, I can undo my view, my movements in my viewport. If I click End, I can redo my viewport. You can also type that in the command line, redo view. Okay. And so, I don't know. Yeah, let's just try this. Again, you'll have to, something left over from the, okay, so I'm gonna maybe better if we're looking at collective space. It's outdoor shared space, maybe some of the circulation, do something like that. And we can also still tweak with our perspective angle. Okay. And we can shift that. And we probably want to make sure we're about at eye level. We could imagine that we're sitting if we wanted to. So by the way, if I wanted to do that, I can move this guy down to the ground and move it up to about 6. Okay. Getting a little bit of overhang. Okay, that's a nice one. I'm gonna save that. And I'll just click a site relationship thing. I'm sure your guys will have a much better considered and a nice, maybe the second story circulation. We might get a better view of the mountains up here. Maybe we can use that to kind of emphasize how this circulation space and these volumes framing a view of the mountains. So I'm looking north here, by the way. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to make sure I'm about at eye level. I'll move my point that I'm looking from to roughly my floor level, second story floor level. Then I'll just move it up 6 feet. Okay. Maybe we want to back up a bit. So maybe not. We can also tweak again. Tweak that perspective angle down a little bit on my view. Capturing some of that context of how the project is framing. Oh, I wonder if this, when I move these, not at the same time, the point where I'm looking from, the point I'm looking, that changes. I wonder if that changes my lens length. I don't know. Anyway, so there we go. Something like that looks kind of cool. Right, great. And again, that can be anything. Like it can be, looking out at the surrounding context. It can be about vegetation, looking out on, you know, some trees or something like that. It can be about showing a relationship to an adjacent building, anything like that. Okay, so I'm going to save this view as well. Great. But once I have those views saved, I'm ready to go ahead and start setting up my model for rendering. And so I'm going to cover that in 2 separate videos right after this one, which will talk about whether you're rendering in Enscape or V-Ray, how to set up your file for each of those softwares. So we're going to go ahead and end this one, and then in the next one, we'll talk about those software.